Friends, let me tell you in the very beginning that my knowledge about this civilization is in very early stage. As we all know that we have completed 100 years of its discovery from the first excavation, which was conducted in the year 1921. From 5th January 1921 to 10th February 1921. We have completed 100 years, and during these 100 years, lot of work have been done, and I am actually trying to look right from the beginning, and I am trying to see that how the studies about Harappan civilization progressed and what actually happened. Generally, in history and archaeology, at times we continue with what is told to us. We don't try to see things beyond that. And my attempt is to see that how things progressed and what was actually. So it's a sort of historiography, you can say. And beyond that, I'm trying to see the situation, what was happening in the ground. And one person who has extensively that I must mention is Professor Poshel. He is the one who had a detailed database. He has worked a lot very extensively, and he has published also. Particularly, I would like to mention his paper about excavations at Harappa, where he the whole history from the earliest time till the 1990s. So I'm not this. I am trying to see the first excavation and before that, and just few years after that, because that is a very crucial time, and there some development took place which are very relevant, very important. And if I am able to draw your attention to that, I think the purpose of my this presentation would be fulfilled. And the work is still going on. I am still trying to understand certain things, and every time, as and when I go through these old records, I find something better. And even while presenting for this presentation, when I was reading, I had some new insight. So it's not the final, it's just the beginning. And I would like to share what all I know. And for this, I draw this from the Marshall, because when he had no idea about this findings, he published the all details in the Illustrated London News so that someone who is knowledgeable can give the information. And I'll be happy if any of the participants or listener is having any other idea or alternate can suggest something that will be really wonderful. So when we talk about nowadays, we talk Harappan culture and Harappan civilization. So the earliest reference what we find in records is the Harappa mentioned by the scholars earlier also. In 1831, just 2 years later, we get it as a Harappa. And in 1912, fleet write for the first time Harappa. And that is what the standard term we have utilized. Even Dayaram Sahni, when he excavate, he used term Harappa, Harappa. And even in his draft report, he uses this term. But finally, when it was published in his annual report, it came out as Harappa. But even in some of the captions and other places, you will find he still continue to use that old spelling, Harappa. So this is how the things were changing. These are very minor things, but they have some bearing on the progress of that. And as an archaeologist, we should always try to look at the foundation, because all the scholars who are participating here are talking about the researches, very advanced researches in 2021. And I'm going to talk to you exactly 100 back and even earlier than that in 1921 and beyond that. So this all is based on two sources, original sources, let me. The first one, what we get is in 1834, The Travel into Bokhara by Alexander Burnes. And few years later, the next Charles Mason published a narrative of various journeys in Balochistan, Afghanistan, and Punjab. Here, the Charles Mason was the first to visit and refer. However, he published it later. And after Charles Mason, Alexander Burnes has visited, but he published immediately after 2 years. He visits in 31 and published in 34. Alexander Cunningham gives his report in annual report in 1875. Prior to that, also he had visited the site, but he had not mentioned about that because he was not visiting the site as an archaeologist. Probably I'll come on that when we come in 1875, that his motives were different at that time. In 1886, Longworth Dams writes about the seals found at Harappa in Indian antiquary, and he writes about two seals. We can say one of them was a mature Harappan seal with a motif and a script, and another one was a small, only having a script, late Harappan seal. In 1912, Fleets write again on the Harappan seals, and these seals are very interesting. Actually, this was they were the seals actually which draw attention of archaeologists because they were some kind of thing which were not known anywhere else. And that is what led to the excavation, and that is where the Cunningham missed and chance to discover this site. So these have played a very important role. If you examine this whole developments and the history, you find that how the seals have played a very crucial role in finding out this civilization, and those who did not pay attention, they missed the chance. So Fleet writes in Journal of Royal Asiatic Society. Then in 1617, Rai Bahadur Dayaram Sahani visits the site, and Rai Bahadur Daya Sahani becomes a very significant person. And let me tell you, when we talk about Harappan culture or this civilization, the role of Dayaram Sahni has not been properly examined. It is he who has the credit for this entire thing. But it's unfortunate that we have not critically analyzed, and as usually happens, the director general gets the credit. But this is one person who really had a real role in identification and even thinking about its antiquity. And I'll tell you about in a later stage. So Rai Bahadur Dayaram Sahni, when visits in 1617, and his observations were wonderful. Let me tell you, if you read his brief reports, you will find that this was a person who has an eye to see the archaeological remains. And then he realized this is a site which can reveal something which may be important. And then he conducted excavation, and then finally this civilization was discovered. And then in 2021, he carried out excavation. And this is again a very interesting story. Excavation, his report and findings. And then in 22, between 22 and 25, John Marshall enters. And from here it takes a turn. So the work which was being done by the field workers, now it goes Marshall's entry, then he writes, and then the civilization is identified, and then some development takes place, and finally we come out as a terminology that is called Indus civilization. And that is what I want to talk about, that how Indian civilization was made Indus civilization. So that is a point I would like to end it. This is just in a different order. I was talking about the sources, and I am talking about the original sources. There is again one thing which, of course, it's an international conference, a very simple thing. But unless one refers to the original sources, sometimes you miss many vital things if you are just using the secondary sources. And that is what happens with those who are reading the books and the papers written by others. And if you go to the original source, you get certain things which you will not find anywhere else. So just in a very brief, I'll move to the work of these people. 1829, probably Charles Mason visits. 1829, I am maintaining this is what the Poshel has written. Earlier, I was in opinion that the Charles Mason visited somewhere in 1827 or 28, but still I have to confirm it because Mason has not given the dates of his visits. And Poshel has given 29, and time being, I use the 29. So he visits first time, and then 2 years later, Alexander Burnes goes there and gives a very brief account of that. Cunningham visits in 1853, 1855, and before his third visit in 72-73, Major Clark finds a seal which Cunningham examines during his third visit. J. Harvey, who found another seal in 1884 or prior to 84, and they were studied, and about them it was written. And before 86, O'Connor conduct an excavation and also find a seal there. And about these all in 1886, Longworth Thames write a paper. In the last century, 1909, Pandit Hiranand Shastri visit the site. And in 12, J.F. Fleet's visit for inspection and acquisition of these mounts. And 1914, Hargreaves visited. And then in 17, Dayaram Sahni, when visits the site, he finds its potential. And then the findings, as I have mentioned, about these Harappan seals, which attracts his attention. And then he feels that this is a site which should be excavated. And then he conducts excavation in 21. And then from 23, 24, John Marshall start writing about them. And that was the time that I'm talking about the excavations, where the survey was not like the survey of present. The surveys, that regional survey or the circles used to have their independence. And they were not directly under the central authority of the Director General. Rather, they were attached with the local governments. And they used to work with the PWD, Public Works Department. So that was a different setup. So when you are seeing, you also have to see the contemporary conditions, in what conditions people were working there. And these conditions are, again, why I'm talking about that when you come about the writings of Marshall in 22, 23, you also have to see the conditions in that in the 20s in India. And they have a direct bearing on these writings and interpretation. And that is what I want to draw the attention of archaeologists and historians, that archaeology and history cannot be done in isolation, though it has to be based on the evidence, but there are many other factors which influence the interpretation or their study. And that is the point which I will try to make out. So the very first visit was in 1829 by Charles Mason, and he published his report. So these are all original works which have been referred in volume 1, chapter 20, he writes about it. And it's a brief report, but beautiful, from page 452 to 54 or 55. He writes precisely 75 lines and 611 words, where he mentioned that how he reaches on the site. There are mounts towards the village. He mentioned a brick castle. And this castle is very important. And its existence and its disappearance is also a story. And why I'm mentioning this one particular structure, because the way it is mentioned, you can understand the understanding of those who are writing. So it is not only what is written, but how it is written that also tells you about the writer. Charles Mason goes there, and if you read these accounts, you will also find that what the authors were thinking or what the authors were trying to find out. So Charles Mason goes there. He is looking at this site. He mentions, give a brief description about the mounts at the north, at the south, what he used at the front and the back. What his front was the northern side, his back was the southern side, and then towards the west mounts, which he feels that they are the natural mounts, which are of course all the habitational mounts. And he writes that the mounts at the south, they are definitely the man-made, artificial, and there are buildings, walls with niches, like in the east you find. So as far as these observations were concerned, they were quite good. But his identification of mounts was not proper, and he writes about this castle. There is a huge, and this structure would have been the way he describes, would have been a large monument. Now, we do not know precisely whether it was some exposed Harappan structure maintained and used by the later people, or there are also some mentions that a local Sikh leader had constructed a castle, probably reusing these Harappan bricks. But whatever it was a big structure lying dilapidated when Charles Mason visits it, and he mentioned it. He also see at the site, and since he was looking or trying to identify these ancient remains with those places associated with the invasion of Alexander. And that is one thing, because before the excavation at Harappa, we know that entire world was thinking that the history of India doesn't start before the invasion of Alexander. So therefore, they were all looking everything from their point of view, and therefore probably they were making the big mistakes. So he gives this description, and then he stays there for only for a day. Who made the first sketch at Harappa? He doesn't mention here, but when he reaches to Multan, he remembers that when I was Harappa, I had made a sketch of that castle, but he misplaced it. So the first information about preparing a sketch or a plan of a structure at Harappa was, the credit goes to Charles Mason. But that document is not available. Only what we get is the information about it. Soon after his visit, Alexander Burnes visited the site. He also mentioned about the castle, and also about mention about some stone rings which were lying there. And this stone ring again are very interesting, because they were associated with one of the Majar there, or a Dargah. And that is how that, the Indian system was protected ancient remains. So these were there right from 19th century. They continued there, and nobody lifted them. Even the contractor who removed all these structures from the site and used these bricks as a ballast, even he did not destroy those things because of their religious affiliation. So that is how things work sometimes in favor. So he also writes about the site, and this is what a brief note, only a very brief note. He writes about the site at Harappa. And then in 53, when Alexander Cunningham visits, he was not in the service of Archaeological Survey of India or in archaeology. And what I feel based on his work, that probably he was collecting Indo-Scythian coins in Punjab region. And in his that endeavor, he visited this site. He saw some structures there, particularly the steps on the mounts towards the west, and he identified some of them. But by that time, the castle was had disappeared, and the contractor had removed these all superstructures for laying the Lahore Multan railway. So the mounds by now were deserted, the structures were removed, and what was there, only the few things which were buried or partially exposed. Then 2 years later, again he visits. He doesn't mention about these visits that time, only when he visits in 1872-73, where he recalls that earlier I have visited this place in 52 and 55. Major Clark has collected one seal before 72, and it was a seal having with a script. How it was found, we do not know whether he carried out excavation or it was a surface find. He presented it to the British Museum, and this is the seal. The photograph is published by Poshell in Indus Age, and this is a drawing of a sketch of it was given Alexander Cunningham in his report in 1875. So in 1872-73, when Alexander Cunningham's visit the place, he is visiting as the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India. That was his second tenure. So in this tenure, he was the Director General of Archaeological Survey of India. And he published this report in 1875 in the Archaeological Survey of India reports. And as the Director General, he conducted excavation also there. But as the Burness was seeing all these ruins as the sites related with Alexander's invasion, Cunningham, right from the very beginning, was trying to see all these old sites and trying to associate with them as the Buddhist sites, the places which are visited by Huensong. And when he goes, he again does the same thing. He identifies Harappa as the place which was visited by Huensong and where he has stayed for 2 years. So this brief description which is given in his report for the year 1872-73 gives information about the site, but it also speaks very loudly about how the Cunningham was looking at the sites and the remains. And that is very significant. Only don't read his contribution in this visit was very significant. We will come on that. But he was looking from a particular angle or biased way, that everything he wanted to identify or correlate with what the Huensong has written or visited. And therefore, he missed a golden opportunity to become the finder or discoverer of the earliest civilization of the world. So one has to be very impartial and do archaeology like the archaeology, but we know the archaeology of 19th century was very different than what archaeology we are doing. It's very easy to see hindsight and say things. So he conducted excavation. His major contribution was the precise measurements of the sites, mounds, their heights, and he prepared a plan of the site, which has actually become the base map. Even till date, all the archaeologists are using that plan as the base map of of the site. He also sketches of seal, which was found by Major Clark, stone beads which he excavated from the site, stone rings which have been mentioned right from the Charles Mason, and some of the pots which he found intact. And that was the time when people were not really interested in pottery and other. Will be clear if you read this small brief account. So this is the map where he mentions a few features. Village is located here, and this is a mount towards north, dry bed of Ravi. These are the high mounts on the western side, on the southern side. And if you read the Mason's report, you will find his camp was somewhere here. His horses were grazing here, and I feel the castle would have been here on the river bank, probably on this mount close to the village. And here he mark A, B, C, D, E, these features which he find. So he find some brick structure platform which he identify them as remains of a temple and mark them as A here. There is tomb of Nogaja which he marks as B, and these stone rings are lying here as C, and D is the charred grains. And if somebody would have gone on the site today, this heap or mass of charred grain would have been the most interesting thing for an archaeologist. But that time it was not that significant. He mentioned them, but in his report he doesn't mention even a single word about them. And here is a structure which is identified as E, that is a Buddhist monastery. Now, that is what he mentioned. There is something, if you try to understand it, a person visiting the site is trying to find out something Hindu, something Muslim, something Buddhist. So one remain as temple, one structure as Muslim, third structure as Buddhist. Try to understand the approach, and that is what how the things have changed. And archaeological elements here and the charred grains which are here. And later on, let me tell you it very clearly, and you should understand that Cunningham never marked mounds at A, Mound A, Mound B, Mound C. He marked certain important features which is noticed as A, B, C, D, E. But later on, when others visited, they started calling it B, Mound C, Mound D, and Mound F and all. So now we know these mounds by different A, B, C, D, E. But Cunningham marked these mounds as A, B, C. He only marked he exposed. So this is how the things change. This is what the earliest thing which is mentioned right from the mason, and he writes about these rings which people believed they were the thumb stone or ring of Nogaja. These are the tools, the charred blades which he found there. And he gives a lot of description, but about excavation he writes only. And he says, I made several excavations at Harappa, but the whole surface has been so completely cleared out of the railway contractor, out by the railway contractor, that I found very little worth preserving. And his chief discovery, what he mentioned, my chief discovery consists of a number of stone implements for scraping wood or leather. And most of them have the age, he gives their details of that. So these are the things which he found. And then this is the pottery which he found there. He gives, and then he writes about, but there is no description or any other thing. And the most interesting observations of Cunningham was on this seal, and that is very significant. I would like to draw your attention again that how you look at thing and what was the status of archaeology. And I just quote and read, the text is there, original text. The most curious object discovered at Harappa is a seal belonging to Major Clark, which was found along with two small objects made of a dark brown jasper. And which is shown there, he talks about how the seal is and how the bull is engraved. And he says very deeply a bull without hum, looking to the right with two stars under the neck. Now this one line is very important. Dismiss it, and that is worth reading and understanding. What he writes, above the bull there is an inscription in 6 characters which are quite unknown to me. So here comes, there is something which I do not know. And here comes the final decision. They are certainly not Indian letters. And as the bull which accompanies them is without a hum, I conclude that the seal is foreign to India. And by this one-line conclusion, Alexander Cunningham miss a epoch-making discovery because he feels that there is something which I do not understand. So if I do not understand, it cannot be Indian. And let me tell you, by the time Cunningham was the person who was the most knowledgeable person as far as archaeology, antiquities of India is concerned. There is no doubt about it. Even the governor generals in his council meeting minutes writes it. He is a person who is the most knowledgeable. But his knowledge, he feels that if I do not know something, it cannot be Indian. And then he misses that golden opportunity and he dismissed this that it must be foreign object which has come here. Sorry. Then in 1886, Longworth write about this this seal, what the Cunningham has already written, and another one which was found there, a late Harappan. Where, since they do not know about the script, it was published upside down. Sorry, these names, please ignore Alexander Cunningham here, 1912. It is the J.F. Fleet. He writes about the third seal, which was also found there by a school inspector, and the third one was excavated by the superintendent of police who conducted excavation there. And he published in the Royal Asiatic Society Journal. And where he gives a very precise measurements, and his observations were quite good. He writes about how these would have been made, how they would have been used. So the Fleet observation on these seals, though he couldn't understand, but his observations was very fine, and he described them very well. And these are all three seals which are published by Poschel in Indus Age, and they were on the British Museum in the British section, because till that time nobody had idea that how old they may be. Now in the 20th century, things take a why I was talking about that these Europeans who are going to the archaeological site, they were looking from their point of view. They were trying to correlate them either with the invasion of Alexander Cunningham, or they are going to correlate with Chinese traveler and what is mentioned by him. They were not examining them as the antiquities, unbiased. But in 1917, when Dayaram Sahani visited the site, he feels in a very different way. And he is the person, I feel, who has not been given due credit for his work in this field. It is he, the entire credit for the discovery of this culture and civilization goes to him. He was one of the most brilliant archaeologists. Let me tell you, we have not examined him, we have not worked properly because he was not given due recognition, and you will find that he was sidelined also for his works. And he published this brief one paragraph in the report in 1970, where he writes, he writes this Harappa visit, and he writes, now again the question comes, if you read all the writings on Harappa, impression is given that the Director General sitting in Simla is controlling everything, giving direction to go and work on the site, conduct excavation, bring the material and do this great discovery. But if you read the original document, you will find the things are different. As I have mentioned, survey circles were functioning under local government more or less autonomously. They were not under the imperial government directly. And what Dayaram Sahani writes will make it clear that who was firing the shots. He says, I hope to shortly approach the government with a proposal to declaring these ruins as a protected monuments. So the efforts were made from Lahore and not from Shimla. And his interest and his understanding of the site, which is very important. The principal interest of these remains centers in the fact that they have yielded about half a dozen miniature tablets bearing inscription in an unknown script which has not yet been deciphered. He is talking about the seals, and that is what I was saying, that it is the seal which draw the attention to the uniqueness of this site, and he finds that these are the tablets, he called them tablets, not the seals, that they are in an unknown script, but he is looking them from a different point of view, and he is not calling them a foreign language. He calls them a script which is unknown, and that is what really it was. And he says the excavation, systematic exploration may yield more records in these characters and may thus provide a clue to their true nature and the interpretation of these curious epigraphs. So when Dayaram Sahni finds or see these tablets or seals and which is unknown, it curiosity in him, and he feels that if we conduct excavation, we may find reports and it may lead to their decipherment or more understanding. So here is a person who has an idea or a plan to excavate, and it is he who excavate. So nothing that's orders are coming from somewhere else. It is a person who is working in the field, observe the findings, and he feels and he decides, he plans that the excavation should be conducted. History has to be seen as it was. Now, this is a high time after 100 years that we have the things impartially and to understand that what was happening on the ground. So this is what he writes in his report. It's the reference, and in 1920 he start excavation, and I have given you the dates for that. We were working, we were trying to, because nowhere it was written that when the excavation was conducted, how the excavation was conducted for last almost 3 years prior to 21. Since the 100 years were going to be completed, we were trying to locate the original documents, and finally we could locate. We could see, we have gone through the draft report which was sent by the Sahni, the correspondence between Dayaram Sahni and the Marshal, correspondence between the local agents, the political agents at Lahore, and the superintending archaeologist, and how the entire operation was carried out, what are the problems were before the excavation, and what all developments took place after the excavation. The story is going to come out, and it's a very interesting story which speaks volumes about the real situation in the ground. So this brief report was published in the 21 reports of the Northern Circle. Again, it was the Northern Circle which was publishing at Lahore, and it was publishing its own report. And this was a time where the excavations were not given much importance. Those who know the history of archaeology in India, they know that the conservation was the prime concern of Government of India at that time. And they had a clear policy that go for known and unknown can wait. So known were the monuments which are above the surface, and what all remains buried under the ground, they are unknown, and since they are safe, so there was not much focus on them. And if you see the contents, you will find that Harappa appears very late here. So it is all the conservation, and at number 20 comes excavation at Harappa in Punjab. And this was a brief report. He mentioned about his tour that he visited Harappa, and he also mentioned that during the month of January 1921, I was engaged on the supervision of excavation inaugurated at Harappa. And this was the information which was available for last 100 years, that in January 21, excavation is started. But once we got the original documents, I wanted to show you some of the slides, but I'm sorry that I could not show you those all original archival documents, correspondence, his report, and the changes which are made in the report. That is again interesting. Let me mention that he used the term Brahmi for this script because he was sure that it is earlier than the Brahmi. And the word Proto Brahmi makes it very clear that he was firm that it is not a foreign script. And then Marshall asked him in a letter, we have that drop this term Proto Brahmi. So Marshall was not clear that to which script it is, but Dayaram Sahni was clear that it's an Indian script and it's a script prior to Brahmi. So it is definitely an Indian script. So that is the difference, and that is what the original record tells us, that what the things were happening. And then he mentioned about its preservation, and it's very interesting just to know. It's not very archaeological, but it's interesting that the mound of Harappa were preserved as the Hindu and Buddhist monument. You can recall what Cunningham visited. He find remains of a Hindu temple, a Nogaja Pir Dargah, and the Buddhist monastery. And here again in 20s, it was preserved. It comes in official report as the preservation of Hindu and Buddhist monument, and these mounds were preserved. And this excavation report was published. It's available in the published form. And this is the mound. Just I am going to show you some this what the original published material is there. Just to those who have not seen these original documents can have a look. So this is how the mound was before excavation in 20s. And you may notice here the Harappa. That was the spelling which was used till the publication of his report. Even in draft, he uses Harappa. And this is the detailed report. And if you read it, you will find, being in 20s, it was quite extensive and analytical work he has done. And he was quite methodological also. And he carried out, I'm not going in details, they are all published. He laid 3 trenches, and the number of antiquities which were listed from trench A was A1 to A327, trench B, B1 to 67, and trench C, which was a small one, 1 to 90. And please mind, I am saying antiquities listed. It's not the number of antiquities, because I'm not going in detail. There are differences. There are some numbers which does not exist, and there are some numbers which are having more than one antiquity. So they are listed 327, but actual number varies. And the report was published in the report on 15th September 1921. It is dated. So Dayaram Sahni took a lot of time in finalizing his report. When you see the document and correspondence you find, because he was trying to understand certain things which were unknown to him. And the way they were proceeding, the way he was feeling, it's a really very important, not from Harappan directly, but when you see the history of archaeology in India. He has given a detailed list of photographs which are published there. This is how the excavations were conducted. Now you can say these are the pits, but this is how they used to excavate. So they dig from anywhere, large trenches, and expose the structures. And in his long trench, he got structures which was marked as from A to L. A, B, C, D, E, F. They are all fragmentary. He could not make out any plan of that, but he recorded, means he drew their plan and elevation. And these were the 3 seals of verse and reverse, which were found in the excavation conducted by Sahni. These are the Bengals, which are there, excavated from there. And this was one sculptures. And Dayaram Sahni was very unhappy that he is not finding sculptures. He is not finding coins. He is not getting inscriptions, because the excavators at that time used to look for them, and not for the pottery and charred grains and blades and other things. So their main interest used to be in the sculptures, sculptures, inscriptions, coins, and objects like that. And these are the terracotta figurines which are listed. These are a number. from trench A, 3 are from trench A, and 1 is from trench C. And their depth, that is all given there. These are human figurines, terracotta figurines, which were found from there. And these are the toy cards. So these are all published in his report of the circle. And he also gives the list of drawings which are prepared, the scripture, the scale, the place, the description, and the numbers and everything. And a brief report of around 3 pages was also published in the annual report of the Director General. That is talking about 21. And soon after that, a big change take place. And then the autonomy of these circles were actually all these circles were brought under the Director General. So there was a big shift policy of Government of India. So these circles which were autonomously or independently functioning under the local government, imperial government, under direct control of the Director General. And in 22, 23, we know the Marshal was on leave. So his assistants were looking after the headquarters. And Dayaram Sahni had a plan, what he published in his report, program for he writes. In January, I hope to resume the exploration of the mounds at Harappa in the Montgomery to continue it for about 7 weeks. But the reality is that excavation could not be resumed. And it is again very interesting thing. A site which has revealed such a wonderful thing, a new culture, which finally turned out to be a civilization, was not excavated next year. This saying this, that there was a plan and somebody was trying to find out this Indian civilization, is not true. The reality is different. Next year, there excavation at Harappa, and you can see the report. And then the publication of these circle reports also stopped. Now onwards, everything was being published in the report of the Director General, which is published from the Simla. In 1922-23, excavations were conducted at Mohenjo-daro. And now was shifting from Harappa to Mohenjo-daro. There may be different reasons, and one of them was that Harappa was badly disturbed, and the structures which were found there were not so extensive what you find at Mohenjo-daro. So you see the reports and you will find Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, and in the coming years it become Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. And Mohenjo-daro becomes more significant in terms of their findings, in terms of their structure, and then this combined Harappa and Mohenjo-daro lead to the discovery of the civilization. So in 1923-24, it is Harappa and Mohenjo-daro in the report of the Director General. That is the report published. And here you may see that in the, again, the conservation is still primary, and then it comes Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. And in 24-25, it becomes Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. So Mohenjo-daro get more prominence. These are very small things, but if you want to study history, you will find that how the things are changing. And then I'm just going to close with that. And in 1924, when Marshall comes in a picture, and then he starts writing. The excavations were conducted by Dayaram Sahni and R.D. Banerjee, but in the report, Marshall writes introductory remarks. And from where the Marshall's entry comes here. And in when he see this material in the summer of 1924, at Shimla, the material of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, he finds that they are very interesting. He is unable to understand them. But one good thing he does, he writes without losing any time, which he made. I did not lose any time. He writes a detailed article published in Illustrated London News. And in the next issue, Professor says, suggest, writes that they have a close resemblance with the Mesopotamian. That is known to everyone. And then Ged and Sidney Smith write about that. And Ernest Mackey tells that they have not only the similarity with the Mesopotamian, but they also tells about the finding of a seal, and that gives the date of about 3rd millennium BCE. So now few things which the developments I'm just trying to conclude in next 2-3 minutes. Uh, the developments which take place, they deserve attention, analysis, and very open discussions and rethinking about this whole thing. So in 1923-24, when Marshall writes his introductory remarks, he writes, these are the epoch-making discovery. He mentioned them. And there is, I just quote, India, means that is what even after this discovery and the findings, writes that what these archaeologists and historians thought about India. So I quote, India has almost universally been regarded as one of the younger country of the world. So unquote. This is what Marshall writes in his introductory note in the report of the Archaeological Survey. So that was their thinking, that India is a younger country. And then in the same report, he also tried to take the credit of that in a very clear. Now at a single bound, we have taken back our knowledge of Indian civilization some 3,000 years earlier, unquote. Now, two things are very significant here. We have taken. So it is we who have done it. Fine. And the second term which really deserves attention, Marshall honestly writes Indian civilization. That term is very significant. Yesterday, our keynote speaker had right, showing Egyptian civilization, Mesopotamian civilization, Chinese civilization, Indus civilization. This map and term we have been seeing for 100 years, but we have never questioned. When civilization in Chinese, civilization in Egypt is Egyptian, civilization in Mesopotamia is Mesopotamian, why civilization in India was not or is Indian? That's a big question. And if you read these developments, you can get some hint of that also. So Marshall in the very first introduction write Indian civilization. That is a right term because that is how a term used for any civilization anywhere in the world. Chinese civilization, Egyptian civilization, Mesopotamian civilization, and Indian civilization. But later on, things start changing. And then he used a different term. Instead of Indian civilization, he tried to turn it. And then he writes to avoid Indian. He also writes that the people of Punjab and Sindh were living in the well-planned city. So there was an attempt to make people of Punjab and Sindh different than the people of India. And then comes a term Indo-Sumerian Civilization. Because then comes an idea that these people cannot be Indian. They are probably the extension of Sumerian, southern Mesopotamian civilization. And then, he used a term Indo-Sumerian. But by 26, it becomes clear, and I quote him again, owing to its close connection with the Sumerian civilization of Mesopotamia, prehistoric civilization revealed at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa has hitherto been designated by the name Indo-Sumerian. So they call it Indo-Sumerian. But soon it becomes clear that there is nothing like Sumerian. It is distinct, it's different, it's local. And then he writes further, I quote again, with the progress of exploration, however, it has become evident that the connection with Mesopotamia was due not to actual identity of culture, but to intimate commercial or other intercourse between the two countries. For the reason the term Indo-Sumerian has now been discarded and Indus adopted its place. He writes in 2627. Unquote. So now the question comes, if there is a term Indo-Sumerian, I am asking some questions which we need to debate. If there is a term Indo-Sumerian and we realize there is nothing Sumerian, so what remains? It remains only Indo or Indian that was used earlier. But the Indian was not to be used. So it has to be replaced by some other term. And then comes the Indus. So, and then I also just want to talk about few things which I'll not go about food, inscribed seal writing. He write about the Indus civilization, say I can discuss later on. But again, let's understand what was happening. As I have mentioned, that was the time in 20s, the situation in the country. 1919, Jallianwala Bagh massacre, and there was a huge public outrage. 2020, Gandhi and Congress committee talks about Swaraj. So there are the people demanding independence. 21, there was a demanded Purna Swaraj, complete independence. Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Arbindo, Bipin Chandra Pal, everybody was advocating independence from empire. And there was a British government who were telling that we are here to civilize you. But the excavation in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro demolished this propaganda that they have come to civilize us. And these are not the wild thoughts. You have to see. And in 1920-22, Mahatma Gandhi, and between 2022, Mahatma Gandhi led to non-cooperation movement. So there was a nationwide civil disobedience. And 1929, it's a later, but a very significant, I want to draw your attention. In Lahore session of Congress, Purna Swaraj resolution was passed. And Jawaharlal Nehru, as the Congress president, unfurled tricolor on the bank of Ravi. Try to just imagine, on the bank of Ravi. And Harappa, where the Indian civilization is discovered, is located on the bank of Ravi. It was excavated by the Lahore Circle of the Archaeological Survey of India. And this is not my wild imagination. See the contemporary things. Culture and archaeology is deeply related with the nationalistic feeling. And this is what it is clear from Larkana Gazette, what is published there. The beauty of the dilapidated buildings and of articles discovered speaks volume for ancient India and proves the truth of the historical statement that in ancient India was a great and powerful country and was not helpless as she is now. This is what. And in view of this evidence of India's ancient greatness, Britain should treat her, if not as a superior, at least as an equal, and respect her and set her free immediately. So the discovery of Indian civilization at Harappa had a big impact on the freedom movement also. And people started realizing that India was not as helpless as these Britishers are saying. As Marshall himself writes that in 23-24, that India is one of the younger nation in the world. But people realize, those who are intellectual, that India was not as they have been propagating. And they started demanding that India should be treated at least as equal and should be set free. In this situation, calling Indian civilization as Indian civilization would have been difficult for those who wanted to rule this country. And these are some of the hints which I want to give you, that because of that, the Indian civilization, which he mentions initially, was termed Indo-Sumerian, then it was termed Indus civilization. And this seminar is unfortunately using, sorry with the word, is again on Indus civilization, which is actually Indian civilization. Thank you.